we all know, Portland is seen as a smart growth mecca. We theoretically do equitable development. We're leading around urbanism. Really what has happened in North Portland around the creation of the Interstate Corridor urban renewal area is seen by many as a success. However, what we know is about half of the African American population has been removed in the past 15 years through these processes. There were opportunities on the front end to do many things. Many things were done. However, those were not binding. Right? Portland is known internationally as a leader in urban design, with many boasting of its bike-friendly streets, accessible 20-minute neighborhoods, and quaint local business culture. Unbeknownst to many, however, Portland is also a case study in gentrification, a glaring reminder that urban economic disparities will persist as long as the structural inequities or inequalities of our economy remain. So I think it's important to put this in a historical context because as many who speak about the history of Oregon say, Portland and Oregon are very unusual in that we had exclusion laws written into our founding constitution that were very specific to exclude people, African Americans being one of the groups, not only from being a citizen here, but from holding land or entering into contracts. And this persisted until, the mid-60s. Many argue it's still happening now. So a bit of the history. This is a HOLC map, the Home Ownership Loan Corporation map. And this one was created in 1938. It is a depiction of Portland, and as we know, these were then taken up by the Federal Housing Administration and also in Portland, the real estate industry, and codified. And they're obviously called the redlining maps, but also we had restrictive covenants, the deeds of which on these homes still say they cannot be sold to certain ethnicities. People are trying to erase much of this history. We recently rewrote the Constitution in 2000 to take away the language. I think historical revisionism is very dangerous. I wouldn't actually recommend it if we're not going to change the policies. So many of our policies persist in the same way. We just have an even stronger facade of progressivism and liberalism. So the reason this is important to me is this was created in 1938. At this point, there were 1,200 African Americans in the state of Oregon. There were lash laws, different things, taxation that drove people away when they did try to come. But in 1940s, during World War II, Kaiser went and recruited a significant amount of workers, right? 20,000 of whom were African Americans. So this was a major demographic shift. We know that folks were employed in the shipyards. Vanport, the city between Vancouver and Portland, had to be built because the city of Portland would not allow the siting of shipyard or industrial housing because it would be integrated. So they created this in a floodplain. Obviously, then there was a flood, which we all know about. Many of the people had been evacuated prior to that. African Americans still largely were in that area. So in 1948, the largest community outside of Portland was erased in an afternoon. When you look back through history and blackpast.org, different historical databases talk about African Americans becoming refugees and not having a place to go. So the city actually then decided to place people in the Albina district. It was the only place African Americans were able to live, not to buy homes specifically, but to rent. So we will kind of hone down on this geography. For those of you who don't know, we're talking about this area right over here, which is near Memorial Coliseum, it's the heart of the gentrified area. So if you haven't had a chance, Williams, Vancouver, Mississippi, Interstate, all of these streets have been wholly transformed in the space of 15 years at the most. So what we used to have, this was on the corner of Williams Avenue, which has largely been wholly transformed. I think there might be one black business. On each of these streets at this point, there might be one black business, black-owned business. Many of them do not employ any of our folks, but the picture on the left was one of the buildings we used for enterprise commerce. It was our economic district. I do have a significant mapping project, which also has all of the properties taken from eminent domain for Memorial Coliseum, Legacy Emmanuel, expansion, the I-5 laying of the I-5 freeway. Also Williams, which had at least 100 Black-owned businesses. So it's all mapped. As we do this process together, my hope is to create a more participatory process with all of these different ways of inputting and interacting. On the right-hand side, you will see the cupola from the top of this building, the only thing preserved from it, which is now in Dawson's Park. They just did a $2 million remodel of the park. So it still stands as this kind of gazebo structure. They also continually, they being the city and developers, continually do artistic representations of ethnic culture in architecture. They say it's something like that. So we have lots of pictures of Black people, but the Black people are not there and we're not benefiting. So from the Trader Joe's initiative, the City of Portland, Portland Housing Bureau started a process. As you will remember, the mayor gave $20 million from TIF funding around this specific intervention. And these maps were created by Portland Housing Bureau. They go from 1970 to 2010, and they show the removal. First they show the concentration. You can see, basically if this map was pulled out, you wouldn't see Black people living anywhere but within these 10 blocks really in North Portland. People started to spread out a little bit by the 80s, the 90s. This was the time when African Americans really could start purchasing homes. As we know, there's an article called Blueprint for a Slum. Redlining lasted in Portland until about 1999, so access to capital was very hard to come by. Absentee landlordism was written about by the City Club of Portland as one of the main factors impacting African American communities, and then people starting to cash out, sell those properties without the people who were living there having an option to purchase. In 2000, the Interstate Corridor Urban Renewal Area process was completed. It was a partnership, I'm going to say it like this, it was a partnership between the Portland Development Commission and the community. It was a 3-year engagement process, as we know with HUD. It's a mandatory requirement to do meaningful engagement. So this was 3.5 years. It created the Albino Community Plan, which is a beautiful plan. And I do reframe the conversation. We didn't talk so much about community benefits agreements, you know, back in those days, but for me, reading through a lens of today, that was a very robust community benefits agreement. It talked about the need for at least 5,000 more housing units in the area. It talked about economic development opportunities. I mean, we have to really recognize, being from Oregon, you know, I'm a rural-born Oregonian, this is kind of like the land that time forgot. It kind of stayed like other segregated parts of the country until 2000. So it's very interesting when you start to think about the needs people have, right? They needed good schools. We had busing up until the mid-70s, busing Black kids out of North Portland into, you know, wealthier suburbs. It's amazing to me that that lasted for as long as it did. The significant piece, the Albino Community Plan was adopted into our comprehensive plan. It was apparently, what I've learned now, a non-binding legal document, so there is no way to hold the city accountable around it, though for me the adoption and inclusion in policy documents would suggest to me that it was a binding agreement. They also created the Interstate Corridor Urban Renewal Plan, which is written about. It kind of has disappeared. Gentrification and displacement were on the lips and minds of all Black people. If we start thinking about Memorial Coliseum, these successive waves of serial forced displacement had been happening since the 1960s to the African American community. I think the amount of houses taken was probably 1,000 homes, all told, through eminent domain. So we knew that a new phase of planning and development would negatively impact the community if we didn't talk about gentrification and displacement. Well, I'll tell you, is even when we started engaging the mayor and the PDC in 2013, they still said they had no idea gentrification could happen. I've read through, I mean, it is written everywhere. So it's a willful not knowing, right? A willful ignorance. By 2010, this is a demographic breakdown of Northeast Portland. People are being pushed out to Deep East County, right? What we see, and this was the thing, right? Public money was seeded in this area so that development would take off. What we know, and I know you can't see it very well, this just came out, it's from Johnson Economics. It's a research about the rent increases from 2011 to 15. You know, the darkest piece is in North Portland. Rents have increased 71% in North Portland in the past 4 years. Higher increases than anywhere else, and yet the median income based on that state of housing report by the city for African Americans is $27,000. The median for Native Americans is $22,000, and they broke out the data by, or Portland by 24 neighborhoods and showed these two populations couldn't afford to live anywhere in the city. In my community in North Portland at the moment, a 1-bedroom, which most everything is a studio, 1-bedroom, starts at $1,700. Which is ridiculous. In Oregon, number 1, and ridiculous. In North Portland, number 2. This map, when people tell me they don't know what is going to happen to African Americans or didn't have any forethought about what is happening, this map was published in the Racial Ethnic Disparities Report by Multnomah County. They just received a $3 million grant for African American public health interventions a year ago. This is not money that came to the community, by the way. What we see, the circled area says that between 2000 to 2025, the African American heart, remember how dark that was, will have very few, and the community will be relocated east of I-205. The concentration of poverty and the dislocation, or the disinvestment of the geography are the same. The people are still concentrated together, which for our intents and purposes is a good thing because we need community connections. These areas are very hostile for our community because we've never had a chance to live in those areas, and also because people don't want us there. NIMBY is alive and well. Everybody says having folks who look like us in their area will drive down their property values. So it's easy, I constantly get asked, you know, do you have hope? Do you find this depressing? Why do you keep fighting? I lost my house in 2010. My mom and I became homeless. This was after moving to England, getting my master's degree, coming back, trying to get work. I'm doing the work I do now as a consultant, which is consulting with the local and regional government about issues of equity, inequity. What does equity mean to me? It means parity. I want people at the bottom to have the same access to opportunities and resources as the folks at the top, irrespective of what color. I think that is what social justice is about. If we are now in a time of economic recovery in Oregon, which has never been the case, then we have a duty to do for those who have had to go without for generations, 6 generations at the very least. So I decided to create what I wanted to see, right? Mindy Fullilove writes about root shock, the impacts of serial forced displacement. I prefer that language to gentrification. And so root shock is the trauma that comes from being ripped from your community, ripped from your place. So I like right to return. We have a preference policy happening. This will be rolled out soon. But for me, it's greater than that. It is the right to root, to set down roots, to have a place. Because our people, while they're being moved out to East Portland, it's still not our place. We're already being removed from that area. There are no sidewalks. It's a food desert. All of our nonprofits are in North Portland. All of our churches are in North Portland. It's about 10 hours, or not 10 hours, 10 miles to get back. And people do make that trek every Sunday, right, for church, for healing. So I will leave this unsaid because you all have a chance to look through the document.